Yesterday in the Kingdom of the Middle was the 25th anniversary of the Order of the Evergreen. The Order of the Evergreen is a grant level award for art, well, arts and sciences. And when learning about more about the history of the Evergreen, that's where a triple peer had once said that someone with an AOA level, so an AOA is an award of arms, that level, that person should be able to talk about their art for about 30 minutes. A grant level, which is an evergreen, that artisan should be able to talk about their art or their science for about 2 hours. And if you are looking at a laurel, they should be able to talk about their art until everyone falls asleep and continue talking about their art. And since I was made a laurel back in November of 2024, I took this on as a challenge to see how long I could talk about my art. But if you've been to my channel before, you'll know I have many videos on Blackwork Embroidery, so I won't continue talking until everyone falls asleep or just stops watching this video. But I did want to talk a little bit about Blackwork Embroidery. If you're interested in more of what I have different videos on the history of blackwork. I have videos on how to do blackwork, the technique of it, the different types of blackwork. Did you know there are actually two types of blackwork? There is the early form, which is a counted stitch, which is what I like to focus on. And then there's the later form, which you find in the second half of this, the 16th century in England, and that's the swirly floral type. But I will get into all of that in a minute. First, I just wanted to say hello, my name is Lynn Fairchild, and welcome to my channel. And aside from all of my videos and stuff, I also have books. Here are two of them. I will have links below in the description if you're interested in learning about any of the patterns that I may talk about or that you see. I have patterns. One book specifically focuses on patterns from different pattern books, and the pattern books are model books. They're from the 16th century. Some are German, but some are Italian. Some are also French, but the thing is, you'll find that some of them are the same patterns that have been recycled from different publishers throughout the years in the 16th century, while other patterns are new patterns. And then the other book focuses on embroidery patterns not only from the 16th century, but the 17th century as well. So a little bit of history about blackwork embroidery. Actually, let me go back a little bit further with why I was inspired to do this video, and bear with me. I'm trying to do it all in one take without having to stop and edit the video. So I started doing blackwork embroidery when I was 16 years old. I took a class. I was very fascinated by it because I already knew how to do cross stitch, and found that when I did cross stitch and how I would outline my pictures with the black trim, that was actually the double running stitch that you find in the earlier form of blackwork embroidery. So I was already doing it without realizing I was doing it, and so I just became fascinated by it. So that was when I was 16 in high school, and then fast forward many years, I finally got my my Willow, which is an AOA award for art. I got that in 2013. I was surprised to receive my grant level award, which is the Evergreen, in 2018. And then I had a drive-by in November of 2024 where I became a laurel. So I'm now a master of my art and super excited about it, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. So blackwork embroidery, a little history about it. If you look at the early embroidery from the Mamluk embroidery, it's Egyptian embroidery, and you can find this type of embroidery in different museums from about the 10th century to about the 15th century. And with that, it is a double running stitch. I know, I said I was going to try to do this all in one take without editing, but I find that when I get excited, I just start to ramble, which might also be good for trying to do this challenge of just continuously talking about your project or your art, your craft, until everyone falls asleep and you talk their ears off. So long story short, Mamluk embroidery, it is Egyptian embroidery from about the 10th century to about the 15th century. It's a double running stitch. And so since this was an Egyptian embroidery, you find through the trade routes that it went up through Spain and up through Italy and found its way going through the different courts in Europe and eventually made its way into England. I particularly, myself, I like to focus specifically on 16th century English embroidery, but that's not the only thing that I focus on, because I also like to look at other embroideries as well. For example, here is this. This is a sampler I made years ago, and all of these patterns on here are from a 16th century Italian sampler. And I have, with all of these, not only do I have the books, I also have an embroidery blog. So if you would like to see what some of these patterns look like, learn more about where this particular sampler is at, I believe this one's at the V&A Museum, but I will have a link below to my embroidery blog as well. I also have a Pinterest page if you would like to look at a particular pattern. It's probably on that Pinterest page as well. So early on in my embroidery career, I made, let's see, actually I will start with this. This is my first attempt at a caul. I made this back in high school, and how you can tell it's my first attempt, I could not figure out how to put the band around the head without like trying to keep all of my seams together. But as you can see, this part is supposed to be sewn together and it's not. And the other thing to be able to tell that I was in high school, if I zoom in here, you can see I did not roll my hems. I just kind of sewed everything in. But this was my first embroidery on a caul, and well, one of my first embroidery pieces. One of the things, here's the inside so you can see how my ends look like. One of the things, this is linen, but I used embroidery floss on this, and I learned the hard way. I was using what I had, and as a person in high school, I didn't have a whole lot of money to spend, so I used what was available, and I had embroidery floss. Embroidery floss did work. I would pull one strand out. If you don't know embroidery floss, it's 6 strands all coiled together, and then I would pull one out, and that's what I would embroider with. But the thing is, because it was coiled together and you pull one strand out, it tends to coil up on itself, which means then it knots itself. And once it's knotted, it's almost impossible to get those knots out. And so then I would have to just try to embroider them in on the back side of my embroidery. And then I had someone recommend silk embroidery, and then I did my research and then found out that not only is silk embroidery easier to work with, if you get a knot, you just simply pull the knot the other way and it comes out. So it was a whole lot easier to work with, but also it's historically accurate. So yay. So I no longer used embroidery floss after that. I went on to silk thread, and then I first started off using what I could afford, and that was going to Joann Fabrics and buying Gutermann silk thread, which is a very thin silk thread, and it's usable, but it's definitely from, if you want something that looks more historically accurate, if you want something bold, do not use Gutermann because it is very thin, and when you look at it from far away, you can't even really see the blackwork. For example, this is a shirt that I made for my oldest son. I made it probably about 14 years ago. He was super excited when I made this shirt. He called it his pirate shirt. And I put Blackwork embroidery on the end here, on the cuffs. As I zoom in, you can see this is part of the pattern that you can find on Jane Seymour's cuffs. And Jane Seymour was the third wife of Henry VIII. I have her full pattern on my embroidery blog. I believe I also have it on my Pinterest page. I also have it in my, let's see, in my embroidery book. But with this, yes, this is Gutermann silk thread. The one silly thing that I did with this, or also the one thing that I like about Gutermann silk thread, is that it is machine washable, because my son did youth combat in this. So if you can imagine, from the age of 4 to the age of 6, he wore this at every event doing youth combat. It is machine washable, and that was a godsend, because even if you look at it now, you might see a tiny bit of discoloration like right here on the inside, but other than that, the shirt has still stayed white because I was able to wash it and not lose the embroidery. That's also why I like to tuck the ends of my embroidery in on the back side rather than just doing a simple knot, because depending on how thick the knot is or how loose the linen is, I'm just afraid that that knot might pull through, and then your embroidery might unravel in the washing machine, and then all of those hours of work are for nothing. So I like to tuck my tails in, which I've also found on the back side of, I believe it was a stomacher. It was at a museum. I have that also on my blog, where you can see on the back of the stomacher where the tail ends were woven in, so that is historically accurate. I was super excited when I found out that what I was doing was also historically accurate. Normally, you should do the studying, figure out how things are done, and then do the thing rather than doing the thing and then working backwards. But in my case, I did the thing, but then found evidence that what I was doing was actually correct. So, yay. Let's see, Blackwork embroidery. Some more history about it, though. So, as it went from Mamluk embroidery, went up through Europe, and then it became really popular, especially by the 16th century. You can find a number of portraits that have Blackwork embroidery in it. For Europeans, and I'm talking Western Europe, they like to wear it on their cuffs, their collars. You would find it lined like partlets for women. It would be on the inside of the partlet. Let's see. Yeah, that was me. Well, also shirts, like the top part, like especially if you look at like 16th century and the later part, you can see not only is it on the sleeves, but it's on the collar and just the whole, but it's the top half, because for like a woman, you wouldn't see the bottom half because it's hidden underneath layers of skirts, so there's no point in embroidering it because no one's going to see it. But if, say, I were sick in bed and I'm laying in bed, I've got the covers pulled up to my waist, but you might see my top half, so then all of this would be embroidered. And then, so the earlier form is of Blackwork embroidery is a double running stitch, and so that's a geometric stitch. And so with the double running, what that means is you have a pattern and you go in, out, in, out, in, out to like from one point to another. I like to go left to right, but you can also go right to left. It also depends on the pattern. If it's a circular pattern, like for example, this pattern here, it's kind of circular, if you see what I mean. I started in the middle and I did the flower, and then once I did the flower, then I worked my way up, and then I went, let's see, I worked my way up and then I went down and I did clockwise. And then once you do all of the runs for the first journey, so it looks like a bunch of dashed lines. And then on the way back, you then fill in all of those dashed lines. And then depending on the linen fabric and also how big or how small you want your embroidery pattern to be, sometimes I will count every third hole. Other times I will count every fifth hole. Looking at some period historic pieces in museums, I have found that every fourth hole was common. Doing every third hole makes the embroidery smaller, but that's fine if you're doing a small piece. But if, say, you are doing like sleeves, if you're doing the 4-part to a skirt, that is if you don't know, in Tudor England, well, actually just 16th century England, you would have a bodice and then, say, a hoop skirt. So you've got, it almost looks like two triangles, a triangle going this way and then the skirt going this way. And with the skirt going this way, you would have an overskirt and an underskirt. And the underskirt, that's the 4-part, the part that is seen before the overskirt is open, split on it. So if that part was embroidered, you want something big. So I would say doing every 5th stitch would be perfectly fine. And then with the history of Blackwork embroidery, so you get into the 16th century, you have this double running stitch. And then in England, right about 1540 or so, because you can see this I have videos on this as well, please check out my channel. But if you look at Hans Holbein the Younger, he painted a number, and when I'm talking a number, I'm talking over 30 portraits that have Blackwork embroidery in it. He painted more embroidery, Blackwork embroidery, that you can not only see the pattern to tell that it's Blackwork, but you can actually zoom in and recreate the pattern on. He did over 30 portraits with Blackwork embroidery in it, and you can see right about 1540 this changeover from the geometric to a swirly floral. And this is specifically particular to 16th century England. So from about 1540 on, you see a lot more of the swirly floral embroidery that is still called Blackwork embroidery. So if you, for example, go to the Victoria and Albert Museum, look at Blackwork embroidery, you might find the swirly floral type rather than the geometric type. But it's still Blackwork, and that's because Blackwork, technically, it's just embroidery done with black thread. So, for example, if I did red work, it would be embroidery with red thread. And so that's kind of making it simple, but at the same time, you kind of get the point. But it can also be confusing if you're trying to do your research and look for blackwork, and then you find the swirly floral type when you're trying to look for the geometric type, because also when looking at this swirly floral type, that's also where sometimes you'll find like little things, like we might have like a little bead or something woven in to the embroidery, which you don't really find with the geometric earlier form. So, okay, I've babbled on enough, a little bit about that. But if you want to know more about Hans Holbein the Younger, he's someone I've studied a lot about, and I have videos on him taking a critical look at his different portraits that he painted. His father, Hans Holbein the Elder, was a painter. His older brother, Ambrosius, was a painter. And yes, actually, speaking of Hans Holbein the Younger, that is part of where I got part of my inspiration for these cuffs. These cuffs, that was my project last year. I took it to the Pensic War, and I was an alternate for the ANS War Point, and with that, and ANS is just short for Arts and Sciences. And with this, I took inspiration from Jane Seymour. Jane Seymour was the third wife of Henry VIII, and I took inspiration from Hans Holbein the Younger's painting of Jane Seymour and her cuffs, except I changed the center part of the cuffs into different blackwork embroidery patterns also found in Holbein paintings, so it's still all Holbein inspired but different patterns. So what I did here, as I zoom in here, the top part is the same as what you would find on Jane Seymour's cuffs, and those are crosses, and I mostly kept the ocean wave pattern the same. The thing is, her ocean wave pattern had little sticks coming out of it every so often, whereas this ocean wave pattern is without sticks, and it is found on the Boy with the Marmoset portrait painted by Hans Holbein the Younger. And then the center pattern right here, this is from the Darmstadt Madonna, and that is also a painting done by Hans Holbein the Younger. The Darmstadt Madonna, on her dress, because she is in the bottom right corner of the painting. So it's a very large painting with multiple people in it, and it's the lady in the bottom right corner, and she has embroidery on her cuffs, embroidery below her elbow, embroidery above her elbow, and then embroidery right along the top part of her dress, and each part is a different blackwork embroidery pattern. You can imagine how many hours went into that, because, for example, just doing this one cuff alone took me about 40 hours. So since I have two hands, I needed two cuffs. That was 80 hours of my life. So for her dress and the Darmstadt Madonna, if you can imagine, cuffs below the elbow, above the elbow, and along the top part of the dress, that's a lot of hours for embroidery. Now with that, you don't know for sure. She may have done all of her embroidery. She may not have, depending on where you were at in your station in life. Also helped to determine if you did all of your embroidery or if someone else did some of the embroidery for you. What I mean by that. So first, depending on where your station was, so if you are in 16th century England, there were the, I'll think of it in a moment, sumptuary laws. The sumptuary laws, those then determined what you were or were not allowed to wear depending on your station. So like if you were a baron or a baron's son or the wife of a baron, you might be allowed to wear X amount of stuff. Like you might be allowed to wear velvets, but not silk or fur. There are a lot of laws, and then you'll find that they were changed throughout the years. So Henry VIII had at least, I think, like 3 or 4 different acts of sumptuary laws, and then Queen Mary had hers, Queen Elizabeth had hers. So then depending on where you were at in your station. So for example, if I were the wife of a merchant, I would not have been allowed to use silk thread. So that means I probably would have used wool thread on my embroidery. I could still do blackwork embroidery. It would just be done with black wool, not silk thread. But if I were, well, just say I'm a duchess. Yes, I get to use black silk thread. The other thing where, depending on where you were at in your station of life, Mary Queen of Scots. Mary Queen of Scots had anywhere from 3 up to, I think it was about 13 embroiderers in her employment. So at the worst time of her life, she still had 3 embroiderers employed by her. And who knows, they may have been helping her with the black work, but she was known for her black work. So my guess is they were probably embroidering other things such as pillows or seat cushions, other things, the bedspread. But Yes, Mary Queen of Scots was very much known for her embroidery, but so depending on where you were at in your station of life, then helped to determine what you were allowed to use for wool or silk, but also if you had maybe people helping you embroider. Because, for example, say you were a queen, you might have other people helping you with your embroidery. You shouldn't be responsible for doing all of the embroidery yourself. Although with that, there was a fun little, don't know if it's actually historically accurate or not, but I've read in books, and also if you've watched The Tudors, then you know it was in The Tudors, but that's Hollywood, so you don't know. But one thing was that Catherine of Aragon, she was known, that was the first wife of Henry VIII, she was known for doing blackwork embroidery. In fact, it was blackwork did, from at least from my research, blackwork embroidery already existed in Tudor England in the 16th century. And the reason why I say that is when you look at Geoffrey Chaucer in the Canterbury Tales, so 100 years before Henry VIII, if you look back in the Canterbury Tales, it's the miller's wife, I believe her name was Alice, and he talks about her wearing white with embroidery of coal black, both alike within and without. And to me, if you're talking white with black embroidery, both alike within and without, where it's reversible, that sounds a lot like blackwork embroidery. But when Catherine of Aragon, fast forward, she comes to England from Spain. She's the younger princess from Spain. She comes to England. She marries Prince Arthur, who then died a few months later. And then some years later, Henry VII, he dies. So then Henry VIII becomes king. And then when he becomes king, he marries Catherine of Aragon, and then they have a double coronation. And so with Catherine of Aragon, it's believed that she brought blackwork embroidery to Spain, but not really brought it, but made it popular. And so because she made blackwork embroidery popular, now everyone else wants to mimic her and wear the blackwork as well. So chances are that while she was doing blackwork embroidery for Henry VIII, her husband, even after he divorced her and married Anne Boleyn, she was still embroidering his shirts. And then Anne Boleyn found out that your first wife is still embroidering your shirts, what gives? And so there was a spat between Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII over that, and then Catherine of Aragon was told never to embroider his shirts again. From a historical perspective, it sounds like it almost sounds like she was making the shirts, but I doubt that she was actually making the shirts. She was probably just embroidering the shirts that were already made, but that's just my assumption. Yes, as you can tell, I love blackwork embroidery. I can just continue babbling about it and just go wherever my mind goes, because this is one of the things that I really enjoy when doing an arts and sciences display, because I can sit here and talk on and on and on about it, and then depending on different people come up, they have questions, and so what I might start babbling about with one person might be something different than from what I babble with someone else, going on to a different project. So, well, first, we'll start this over here. This is a caul that I made a few years ago. Cauls were historically accurate. I have no actual evidence that embroidery existed on a caul, but for me specifically, because I also wear a coronet, and so since I can't wear my French hood, I mean, I guess I could, but to me, I think it looks a little silly wearing a French hood and the coronet on top, so sometimes I'll just wear my caul and then the coronet, and so I still wanted to have a little bit of embroidery on me, and so that's why I embroidered the back of my caul here. I've already talked about the cuffs that I made. This is a partlet that I made, probably 10 years ago or so now. This was the first time, first I'll show you. A partlet goes up and over like this. I have it tied right here so my arms would go through the holes right here, so my arms go through. I put this on, and then I could put my bodice over top, or this is where when you look at paintings, you can see partlets worn underneath and or on top. And also that depends on, also, again, your station in life. So if I were, we'll just say, I'm the miller's wife. I'm a low nobody, and I don't want to sound mean saying you're a nobody, but on the totem pole, you're lower on the totem pole. And so for them, you would find that they might be wearing a white linen partlet, but a lot of times it was over top of their bodice. But then if you look at higher women up the totem pole, so like maybe a duchess, maybe a baroness, where their white linen partlet was underneath. So they would put this on and then put the bodice on. But then if for extra warmth, because you're in a castle, it's made of stone, it's very drafty. So then they would have velvet or wool. So it could be velvet or wool, but they would have black partlets that would go over top. And so you could wear one, you could wear the other, you might wear both, just depends on how cold you are. But the black wool partlets, that would be for regardless of where you were at, that would go on top. It's the white linen ones. When you see portraits or paintings of the lower, the people lower on the totem pole, sometimes the white partlet was on the outside, which makes sense. If, say, I'm working at a fruit stand in the morning, it might be cold, so I might just want to put something on, but as it gets hot while I'm helping sell my fruit, or whatever my wares are, maybe I'm the baker's wife and I'm helping sell the bread, but as it gets hot, I want to take stuff off. I can more easily take the partlet off if it's on top rather than underneath. So again, that's a whole station thing, but I digress. So anyways, for this, I was inspired by this pattern here. I took a pattern and modified it a bit. This is from the pattern from, I'll remember his name in a minute, the Earl of Moray. His name's escaping me. He was the half-brother of Mary, Queen of Scots, Earl of Moray. But anyways, so this is a modified pattern of what he had on his collar. This ocean wave pattern is, again, the pattern that I also used on these cuffs, and this pattern is from The Boy with the Marmoset. The Boy with the Marmoset, that painting is at the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. And again, if you are interested in any of these patterns, please check out my embroidery books, please check out my blog, check out my Pinterest page, check out the rest of my YouTube channel. I have so many videos on Blackwork that this is probably redundant for some, but if you're new to my channel and you are still here, thank you so much for just sharing this passion with me, because like I said, it is something that I love to talk about. I can talk about for hours if you really let me. I am a little on a time crunch today, so otherwise I would just continue talking about embroidery, but who knows how many people had stayed. So another embroidery thing, this is something I've had with me since I started high school. Started doing embroidery in high school. And so that's why when I flip through, actually, I have a bunch of different things in here. Like this is my documentation for the different patterns I did on the Holbein paintings. Let's see. Well, I have this up online on my embroidery blog to give you an idea of different paintings and the different patterns. But mainly I have, like, because I always take this book with me, so in case I'm doing an A&S display and for some reason I've had to step away from the display for a moment, this still has information for people. So the first tab is just a little history on embroidery. And so that's some of my research. And then as you flip on, then these are patterns based on embroidery in portraits. And then to give you an idea, that's how many different portraits I've studied and have patterns on. That's a lot. This is Egyptian blackwork embroidery patterns. So remember before in the video where I talked about Mamluk embroidery, this is where I've studied different ones with that. The thing is, when looking at Mamluk embroidery, some of it is a double running stitch, so inspiring blackwork embroidery, but some of it's not. That's its own creature. And if you want more information about Mamluk embroidery, her name is escaping me. She is a Laurel down in Locac, and she does Mamluk embroidery. I will try to remember to put her website link in the video in the description below. So if you're interested in that, there are also other forms of embroidery. If you look up Kasuti, I might be mispronouncing that. That is an Indian form, also a double running stitch embroidery. And then this is other blackwork embroidery patterns. that I have found, and like some of these are also just from different websites where it may or may not be historically accurate, but just patterns that I've collected. Like for example, this one I printed off in April of 2005, if that gives you an idea just how long I've been doing this. Oh, let's see, what else can I talk about? Let's see, I've talked about one thing I did, this was a project I did years ago on I wanted to show the difference. If you remember earlier in the video where I talked about Gutermann silk thread and where it's good and where it's bad, why it's like where it's machine washable, so it's good, but it's also like very thin. This is an idea to give you an idea of. So if I show you this just from me sitting right here, this top row is Gutermann silk thread, and then these two bottom rows right here, right where I'm pointing to, one is untwisted silk thread and one is twisted silk thread. And then what I did, aside from showing that, so I have a set of 3, 3, and 3. And what I did is I did no beeswax, I did beeswax on the ends, and then I did beeswax throughout the thread. So this was just one project that I did where not only was I trying to show the differences between Gutermann silk thread and then just regular silk thread, but also I wanted to show the differences between, because with beeswax, it's very hard to tell. When you look at, like, say you look at a museum piece, you cannot tell, did they use beeswax, did they not use beeswax, did they use beeswax only on the end or throughout? So for certain things like this, you have to actually do the thing and then try to come up with your own conclusion as to if they used beeswax or not. The reason to use beeswax is because certain threads will fray, and then if the end frays, then the backside, well, isn't as pretty as the front side. Which actually, remember that stomacher that I talked about where the ends were woven in? Guess what? The ends were frayed. That's also partly how you can tell that the ends were woven into the pattern, because they're frayed and you can see it. So just maybe some people didn't use beeswax, but then others, their embroidery is so perfect that you cannot tell which is the front side and which is the back side. And with them, they probably did use beeswax. So as I zoom in here, so Gutermann is on the top, this is untwisted, and that is twisted silk thread. This is no beeswax, this is beeswax on the end, and this is beeswax throughout. So as I turn it over here, you can see this is no beeswax, and see right here what I'm talking about with the fraying, that is, if you're wanting your project to look pretty, this is not exactly pretty. This is beeswax on the end, and as you can see, my untwisted silk thread has stayed, it has not frayed. And then down here where I did the beeswax throughout, I found that I preferred doing beeswax just on the ends and not throughout, because as you put the beeswax throughout the thread, it makes the thread very stiff. And when you're trying to go in, out, in, out, in, out for your first journey and then go work your way back, it makes it stiff and kind of clunky. And then as I don't know if you can see it very well, but you can see with some of the embroidery stitches, you can see where it doesn't look like one continuous line. It almost looks like the first part going out the first way is slightly fatter, and then as you pull through going the second way on your way back, those threads tend to be thinner, and so it almost looks like you have a big stitch and a thin stitch and a big stitch and a thin stitch, and it doesn't look like a seamless continuous line, which is what Blackwork embroidery should look like. It should look like just one continuous line on your fabric. Speaking of using untwisted silk thread, what inspired this project was actually this partlet. It was the first time I had ever used untwisted silk thread. I had both untwisted and twisted silk thread that I just bought, and I really liked the untwisted silk thread because it was shiny, and it spoke to me more than the twisted silk thread. But that said, I learned the hard way, because on the flip side, I had never used beeswax before, and as you can see on the underneath side, my ends have frayed. And so then that's where I learned the hard way to use beeswax, especially if I'm using untwisted silk thread. Another project that I did years ago, this I made for my daughter probably 10 years ago, and this is an embroidered coif that I made. And with this coifs in 16th century England, you will find the swirly floral type of blackwork embroidery and not this geometric shape, but you can find the geometric blackwork embroidery on German pieces, but not particularly coifs. So this was taking inspiration from one, transferring it to another. Just to give you an idea, this is Gutermann silk thread, and then each diamond with a flower. This is a historic flower pattern, and then the diamond pattern was inspired from a German piece, and then the flower is English, but each diamond with a flower took me 20 minutes. There are 88 diamonds on this coif to give, so just take 20 minutes times 88, and then that will give you an idea how long that just this embroidery took me. But and then I probably should have done finger loop braiding for my cord here, but instead I did lucette braiding. If you want to know about lucette braiding, I also have a video on my channel about that. I will try to remember to include a link below in the description for that. Let's see, what else can I talk about with blackwork? At this point, I know I am over a half hour in. If you are still here watching my video, thank you for your support. As it is, I'm super excited. My channel has over 6,000 subscribers at the time of this recording, which I'm just super excited about. Let's see. So while glancing at my binder here, where I just put information I've collected over the years, one of the things I forgot to mention is blackwork. The later form, the swirly floral type of blackwork, is actually described by William Shakespeare in Pericles in Act 5. He describes her needle composes nature's own shape of bud, bird, branch, or berry. That even her art sisters, the natural roses, her inkle silk, twin with the ruby cherry, that pupils lacks she none of noble race, who pour their bounty on her. So he's describing specifically the swirly floral type of blackwork embroidery. That swirly floral type, you'll find that there are a lot of times you'll have leaves and flowers, and that's very nature specific. So that's what Shakespeare is describing in Pericles about this. And even with that, when you look at the swirly floral, it is not a counted stitch. That is the geometric stitch from the earlier form of blackwork. The swirly floral type, what they would do is you would take a pattern, so put a pattern on a piece of paper, poke a bunch of holes in it, and then put that pattern over top of your fabric, and then take a charcoal powder and rub it over, and now you've got little dots. And then you would take ink and connect the dots, and then you would just embroider over the line that you have just put on your fabric. And with that, there are a couple schools of thought here, because there are a couple of examples at the Victoria and Albert Museum that show blue ink, but it's blackwork embroidery. And so with that, it may have been that originally the ink was black, and that depending on what was put into it to make it black probably faded over time into a blue. And the reason why I say that is also, like, if you look at Mamluk embroidery, you will see a lot of I'm talking with ink, but that's also making me think of threads. So with the Mamluk embroidery, if you look with the Egyptian embroidery from the early on the 10th to 15th century, some of the threads are brown, but they may have originally been black. It just depends on maybe how much iron was put into the thread to dye it black, and then over time it faded to brown. With the ink, it may have originally been black because it makes sense to embroider black thread over black ink, and then you can't see the difference. Whereas if I'm taking black thread embroidering over blue ink, that blue ink is probably going to stand out somewhere, and then it doesn't look as nice. But over time, the other reason why we can see the blue ink is because English thread. So the Spanish silk from the 16th century still exists. They didn't put as much, I believe it was iron, into the thread. So if you look at an embroidery piece from a museum today, and the embroidery is intact, it is probably made with Spanish silk thread rather than English silk thread, and that's because the English put more iron into the thread, and so that's eroded the thread over time. And so now what we're left with are pieces where you see part of it embroidered and then part of the thread is missing, and then you just see the blue ink where they had traced over it. So if anything, it is kind of neat to just see what they did and how they did it, because they just, like I said, you poke holes in the pattern, put the pattern on the fabric, take the charcoal powder, rub it on, and then after that you take ink, connect the dots, and then you embroider over that. But then with that, when you look at different different pieces, depending on if it's a shirt, if it's a caul, if it's sleeves, a cuff, whatever they embroidered, you will find like each leaf might have a different embroidery pattern. So like some leaves where it goes like this, but then inside it might actually have a geometric pattern inside this leaf that is not a geometric shape. And so some stitches might be like 2 holes up and 1 hole over, and then other stitches might be 3 holes up and we'll say 4 holes over. And so it's not really counted because you're trying to create a natural curve with the leaves and with the flowers. So that's why I always call it the swirly floral type. That's the second type of blackwork embroidery. Let's see, what else do I have in here? Also, when I say blackwork embroidery and where I talk about the earlier form or the later form, the earlier form is also known, the geometric blackwork embroidery. It's also known as Holbein stitch. It's known as double running stitch. It's also known as back stitch. In my notes here, I also have it as also being listed as festoon stitch, and that is from, I think it's a book, Blackwork by, I want to say her name's Mary Costello. If I remember, I will try to put her book, her information in the description below. But if anything, I know I've got her book information on my Blackwork Embroidery blog, so definitely check that out. That is an older book, but still has a lot of good information on it. So blackwork right here, I probably forgot to mention this. Blackwork could be found on various types of fabrics. It could be found on silk, linen, satin, velvet, netting, but in my opinion, just the white linen and the black silk thread was probably the most popular. At least that's the type that was painted the most, was the white silk, the white linen with black silk thread. As far as embroidery pieces so that's what was painted most, is the white with the black embroidery. But if you look at museum pieces, you'll actually find some pieces that have other colors in it. Like it might have red, it might have green, might have blue. Actually, there is a portrait of where it's blackwork embroidery, but it's done in red thread, and that is, I want to say, Bess of Hardwick. She was the lady second to Queen Elizabeth I in Elizabethan England, and there is a portrait of her where you can see red embroidery all down her sleeves, and it is geometric, and it's blackwork, the Holbein stitch, but it's done in red ink, red thread. So that's where earlier where I mentioned blackwork just being black embroidery done with black thread, and red work being embroidery done with red thread. So it's still the Holbein stitch, the double running stitch in her portraits, just done with red thread. Where I think one of the reasons why they would use the black is because, well, one, this also goes with sumptuary laws, where having, like, especially in like Elizabethan England, where the lace was becoming popular, because, you know, especially once you work your way into the 17th century and you've got lace on everything, lace was expensive. Lace was also, think of it as being taxed because of the sumptuary laws. And so, like, if I'm a lower person, I'm a merchant's wife, I could do blackwork embroidery, where from far away it might still have the look of being sort of like lace on my cuffs without having to pay the sumptuary laws. Because if I wore lace and I wasn't allowed to, because the lace was meant for the higher ups on the totem pole, and I'm lower on the totem pole, then I would be fined for wearing something that I wasn't allowed to wear. But also with that, if, say, I use black thread on my white linen, depending on if my white linen isn't a pure white, but by using black might make it seem more pure white. So the whiter your whites, then like maybe the more you can afford, because you can afford the more finer things in life. just my thought that that might be an inspiration for using black. That, and also, if you think about it, putting black embroidery on white fabric and then trying not to get one to bleed on the other, that takes a delicate way of washing it, and so that might mean more time with washing your clothes. But if, depending on where you're at, where your status is in life, if you can afford to have someone delicately wash your clothes and try not to get one to bleed on the other, versus if I'm the merchant's wife, I might have a whole lot of other things to do, or not even the merchant's wife, we'll say I'm the baker's wife. I have a whole lot of other things to do in the kitchen. I don't have a lot of time to just focus on the laundry. Then you might hurry up, do the thing, and then I've had my embroidery bleed onto my fabric, and then, oh, I'm babbling again. Sorry, but let's see. I would love to continue talking about Blackwork embroidery, because I could definitely go into more specifics, like just talk your ear off just about Hans Holbein the Younger and what he painted, who he painted, when he painted it, and then the embroidery patterns found in those different portraits. In fact, I even have videos on it on my YouTube channel. But as it is, I'm kind of running out of time, and I want to try to get this video up real quick onto my YouTube channel before I have to leave. So, where I would love to continue talking about Blackwork embroidery, I'll just have to leave it at, please check out my YouTube channel and the other videos on my channel. If you get a moment, please select thumbs up that you like this video. It helps with the algorithm. If you have questions or comments, please post them below. Please click subscribe and ring the bell to be updated when new videos come out. If you are interested, again, right now I have 3 books on Amazon. These are 2 of them. If you are interested in some of the patterns you saw, if you want to learn more about patterns, for example, earlier when I talked about, these are patterns from different pattern books from the 16th century. Some of the patterns you will find are the same, where different publishers, like for example this, and we'll just say like this 1535 publisher published an embroidery book and he was German. But then you might find some of the same patterns, but like this page was turned and rotated and then put on, so your page 6 was on this page 18 instead of on the left side, it was on the right side by this Italian publisher from 3 years later. And so I dive into some of the different patterns and what you find that are the same, what you find are different. So some publishers might use some of the same plates with embroidery patterns on it from some books, but then put some new patterns into their book to make their book still kind of original. So that's what this book is. If you are specifically into 16th century patterns, you want German patterns, Italian patterns, French patterns, you will find, especially German and Italian, you will find that in here. If you are interested in some of those patterns, but these are pre-18th century, so I specifically focus on the 16th and 17th century. These are patterns you would find in Hans Holbein the Younger portraits, but also other portraits such as, like this is, I have patterns from an Italian sampler at the V&A Museum, 16th century Italian linen cloth, which is at from a museum in Italy. I have there's the Hans Holbein the Younger portrait paintings or embroidery. This is a 17th century long English sampler, and that's at the Cleveland Museum of Art. Here are patterns from a 17th century English embroidery sampler at the Royal Ontario Museum. So I have different patterns from different samplers and just different embroidery pieces. Some are from paintings, some are from the actual embroidery itself. So if you get time, and I think these are, I believe they're $5 if you, like $4.99 on Amazon. Don't quote me on that, but please, if you can, buy a book. It helps out. If you like the video, please actually select thumbs up, like the video, subscribe. It helps with the algorithm. And just thank you so much to my subscribers for watching this channel, subscribing, and just, this is something I'm excited about and I'm happy to share. And so recently I did a video where I did a deep dive into Hans Holbein the Younger's portrait of Thomas More and his family. And what he did, he not only painted or drew a sketch of the entire family, but he also drew sketches of the individuals in the family, so that way when he did the full family portrait, he had an idea of exactly what each person looked like. And he did this portrait, the sketches, and then the painting somewhere between 1526 and 1528. And so that video just recently came out. And then coming out next week, I have a video where I do a deep dive into Hans Holbein the Younger's portrait of the ambassadors and the symbolism between so many things in that portrait. Hans Holbein the Younger loved to put little clues, little Easter eggs in some of his portraits. Sometimes it was in the portrait, sometimes it was behind the portrait. And with that, for example, if it was behind the portrait and it was a miniature, then it was painted on a playing card. And the playing card, that's because of the vellum. And so the miniature, he would specifically pick out cards, a playing card for that person. So, for example, Catherine of Aragon, the first wife of Henry VIII, he painted her portrait on the Queen of Hearts. You get the idea. Just the same, if maybe he thought a certain way about you, then he might paint you on the Ace of Spades. If you were very rich, you were the king, the queen, you were from the royalty, you might be painted on, like as the king, you might be painted on the King of Diamonds. And so he just picked certain cards to kind of play on how maybe he saw you or felt about you. But it's on the back side, and then like once the miniature was painted and then put into its frame, it was to know that what it was painted on, except for him. So maybe his own little running joke. But then other portraits or paintings that he had, such as the ambassadors, he put Easter eggs into the painting. People, when you look at this painting, at first the definite thing you'll notice is the skull that is kind of stretched out. And then you have to look out from the side for the skull to look normal size. But there are so many other details in this painting that you really have to like zoom in. And as I was studying this painting and doing a deep dive, I was still finding things about it that I hadn't noticed before. For example, there is a lute that is upside down on the floor underneath the table, and it is one of those you really have to kind of zoom in because it looks like it's in the shadows, so you almost don't realize it's there. And that was something new that I hadn't noticed before in my years of studying Hans Holbein the Younger. So please keep an eye out for that video. And hopefully coming up soon, I will have some more heavy armored combat fighting videos, so we'll see. But thank you again for checking out my channel and for being a subscriber, and have a great day.